Welcome to the special Holiday Money Tips edition of Debt Free in 30. I'm Doug Hoyes, and since it's the holiday season, we've got a special show for you today. On most of our shows, I have one guest for the entire 30-minute show. Today, I've asked some of our previous guests to give us some advice for money management and spending over the holidays. This is not a best of show where I replay a bunch of clips that you've already heard before. This is all new information that I think will be very useful. I've got 3 guests lined up today. In the second segment, Heather Cudmore, a credit counselor, has some very practical tips for spending over the holiday season. At the end of this segment, Gail Vaz-Oxlade returns with a great tip about how to deal with your bank. You'll enjoy this tip because if you know anything about Gail, you'll know she's not a big fan of paying big fees to your bank. And at this time of year, every dollar you can save is a great thing. But first, I'm very pleased to welcome back to the show Dr. Leanne Davies, who is my guest on our second show. Dr. Davies is the author of When Life Bites You in the Wallet, Taking Control of Your Finances. It's a book that has lots of practical advice, and you can find a link to her book and lots of other information in the show notes at hoyes.com. Dr. Davies still holds the record for the most educated guest we've ever had on the show. She has a master's degree from the University of Waterloo, and she also has an MBA and a PhD, as well as many years of experience working in the financial sector as an employee and consultant for insurance, wealth management, banking, and financial education companies. Dr. Davies has studied how debt impacts our lives, and I think during the holiday season it's a very timely topic. We all want to buy lots of gifts for our friends and family, and the temptation is to use credit cards to do it. That leads to debt, and that may not be a good plan because debt leads to stress. Or does it? There's some research from the United Kingdom that measured psychological well-being and debt. I would have assumed that the study showed that the more debt you have, the more stressed out you are, but interestingly, that's not the case. So, since Dr. Davies is familiar with that study, I asked her to tell us what the study showed about the relationship between debt and our sense of well-being, and what debt does to us personally.
Hi, Doug. Yeah, I was very interested in understanding what debt is really doing to us as a person. And the psychological cost of debt can be quite high. But what's interesting is it depends on the type of debt. So consumer debt is going to cause us some significant psychological costs. Credit is so easily obtained. And as debt levels rise, our psychological impact is really felt. Our well-being, our sense of well-being goes down. As credit card limits rise, our debt rises, our well-being goes down. There's a neat combination. But when we look at mortgage debt, it's not the case. So as we take on mortgage debt, our sense of well-being actually starts to go up. And that does make sense because a mortgage for us is getting the house, right? And building our family around it, our lifestyle around it, and so forth. It's that bricks and mortar that we're all comfortable with and we feel proud of. So it does make sense to take on mortgage debt, as long as you can manage it, of course, with all of the other aspects of your life and how your life will change. The trick, I think, in all of this is to watch that credit card debt. And my tip of the day for you would be lower your limit on the credit card. It's the best way that you can protect your sense of well-being. If you lower the limit, you'll lower your spending and your well-being will go up.
And how do you do that? You just phone your credit card company up and say, hey, lower my credit limit?
It's as easy as that.
So you figure out how much of a credit limit is reasonable and don't let the credit card company keep jacking it up, which they do over time. If you keep making your payments, they keep jacking it up. So your tip is the more consumer debt you have, so you're talking about things like credit cards, unsecured lines of credit, those are the things that put pressure on your psyche, make you feel all stressed out. So if you want to be less stressed, have less of that debt, and one of the ways to do that is to actually take the step of reducing the limit on your credit card.
Exactly. You've taken control of things, and you're going to feel a lot better for it.
Excellent. Thanks very much for that tip.
My pleasure.
So that's interesting. The impact of debt depends on the type of debt we have. Consumer debt causes us a lot of stress. Credit card debt hurts us, but mortgage debt actually makes us feel better because there's a house attached to it. That doesn't mean you should go out and get a huge mortgage. In fact, it may mean the opposite. Your mind can trick you into believing that a big mortgage is a good idea. So our first tip on our holiday tip show is to lower your limit on your credit card so you can't overspend. As Leanne Davies suggests, get on the phone to your bank and ask to have your limit lowered. So what other tips are there to deal with your bank? Well, I've got the perfect person to answer that question, Gail Vaz-Oxlade. Gail was the host of 3 popular television shows, Till Debt Do Us Part, Princess, and Money Moron, and I'm proud to say I was a guest expert on each of those shows. She's written 12 books, and in her latest book, Money Rules, she goes through 261 different rules to help you manage your money. Many of her rules are the opposite of what you'd expect. For example, her first rule is renting is not a waste of money. That's interesting because conventional wisdom is that you should always own a house, never rent, because you don't want to be paying someone else's mortgage. Gail makes the point that owning is fine, but if you have limited cash for a down payment or if you have lots of other debt, you're probably better off renting a smaller place and not burdening yourself with a huge debt load. I'm guessing the banks would prefer that you get a mortgage instead of renting, but that's not Gail's worry. Her rule number 90 is quit complaining and fire your bank. Here's what she means.
Okay, so people, it's a Canadian pastime to complain about our financial institutions. We like to talk about the crappy service we get. We like to talk about the fees that we're paying. We like to talk about the bad advice we were given. And, you know, they did a TV show about the advice that financial advice is given. It turned out that it was really crappy. So the complaints sometimes are quite valid. The thing is that there's not any benefit in whining. So if you're serious about the fact that you don't like your financial institution, take some steps to show them that you don't like them by moving your money. You know, the best way you can communicate to a financial institution that you're unhappy is to move your money.
And isn't that a huge hassle, though? I mean, I've got all my pre-authorized payments set up. I've got my paycheck going in, all my payments. I mean, that's a big hassle, is it not?
It is a big hassle. And so then stop whining. I mean, those are your options. Either you stop whining and you say, I'm going to let them treat me like dirt because it's too much trouble to not. Or you're going to say, I'm tired of being treated like an idiot. And so I'm going to vote with my feet and I'm going to find an institution that A, values me as a client, doesn't treat me badly, B, gives me good advice, shows me the products and services I should be using, and C, offers me a way to reduce my costs as much as possible. And if you can find that in a financial institution, you're good.
So how do I know if I should fire my bank, Dad? Is it simply a matter of cost? They're charging me too much, or are there other things that would be trigger points that you'd be looking for?
Well, you know, Doug, it's funny because people are under the impression that the bank should give them all their services for free. And I say, well, because they don't need to make a living as well. Realistically, you might have to pay something for your services. There are financial institutions out there, tend to be non-bricks and mortar ones that will give you an account for free, a checking account for free. Alternatively, what you can do is you can keep enough money in your account to reduce your fees to zero, or buy the package that works for you with the lowest possible cost. But it means you have to be aware of what you're using. So, for example, I have a checking account at a bricks and mortar bank because I live in a small town and I don't have access to some of those others. And it costs me $4 a month. I'm not going to whine about $4 a month, Doug. That's fine. Okay?
Yep.
But I've watched people with financial institutions. I look at their statements and they have $200 worth of charges. And I think to myself, really? Because you couldn't find something else to do with 196 of those dollars?
Yeah. So the starting point is you take a look at your bank statement for the last few months and see, what do I use in terms of how many checks do I write? How many deposits do I make? Am I banking online? Is it all electronic? And then I guess you start by going to your bank and saying, hey, I want a better deal.
That's right.
And then you have to shop around to see if there's a better deal that you can have. And obviously there's deals if you're a young person, if you're over a certain age, whatever. I guess you look at all those things and decide what's the best.
That's exactly what you have to do. It means you have to be as smart about shopping for your financial institution because they are a service provider as you are about shopping for anything else. So people will go out of their way to save 30 cents on a can of tuna.
Yeah.
Okay? But then what they'll do is they'll go to their financial institution and have a plan in place where every single transaction they do at an ATM that's not theirs is going to cost them $3.
Yeah, we spend all that money on gas to save the can of tuna, but then we're blowing it on the ATM. So either switch banks or quit complaining. That's your advice.
That's my advice.
Great. Thanks very much, Gail.
My pleasure.
I agree with Gail. There's no benefit in whining. You have two choices. Either stop whining or switch banks. Gail gave 3 criteria to look at when choosing a bank. Number 1, do they value me as a client and don't treat me badly? Number 2, do they give me good advice and show me the products and services I should be using? And number 3, do they offer me a way to reduce my costs as much as possible? You need to be aware of the services you're using and then find the bank and service plan that gives you the best deal. If you write a lot of checks, you may want a plan that gives you a number of free checks every month. If you do all of your banking electronically, you may be fine with a non-bricks and mortar bank that offers lower fees. So Gail's tip, either switch banks or quit complaining. More tips after the break. This is Debt Free in 30.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back to this special holiday tip edition of Debt Free in 30. In the first segment, Leanne Davies and Gail Vaz-Oxlade gave us some tips about how to save on credit card charges and bank fees. Those tips are great at any time of the year. In this segment, I want to focus very specifically on the holiday season. So let's welcome back to the show a credit counselor with a boatload of experience helping people manage their money. I'm joined now by Heather Cudmore of Mosaic Credit Counseling. Did I get that right, Heather?
Yes, you did. We're a program of Horizon Community and Family Services.
With a head office here in Kitchener where we're recording today. I'd like you to give me your best tip for people during the holiday season. So you're a credit counselor, you deal with money. And so give me something a bit outside the box. If someone is sitting in your office as the holiday season is approaching, they've perhaps got some financial pressure on them, what's the advice you give them?
What my advice would be to make memories out of Christmas. When clients come into my office, and I may challenge them and ask them what are their best memories of Christmas. And they will talk about decorating a tree, going out and looking at lights, going skating, going tobogganing. Do you know all of those things don't cost money? And, everybody puts so much pressure on themselves to spend money at Christmas, but your best memories are probably the activities that you've done. So again, my best tip for Christmas, make memories out of Christmas.
Which is interesting because we all think of, the big holidays, Christmas being the obvious one, but the holiday season in general as a time where I've got to go out and buy presents because that's what we remember. The kids ripping open the wrapping paper on Christmas morning kind of a thing. And I guess when you think back out of it, yeah, the kids remember ripping open the wrapping paper, but they don't necessarily remember what was in it. And
I had a younger brother, actually 10 years younger, and for one Christmas, we just wrapped a whole bunch of boxes up and had him ripping paper off. And, it was a matchbox. It was something that he owned before that was in those boxes, didn't care what it was.
The old regifting thing.
Yes, it started a long time ago. It was more thrilling just to have the gift ripped open. Could have cared less what was in it.
Yep, and I know with our kids when they were younger, and when you first have kids, well, we got to get them lots of stuff because that's what you're supposed to do. And after they've opened a couple of presents, they want to play with that present. They don't want to have to now open this and that and the other thing.
How many of your kids ended up playing with the boxes?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the box, actually getting in the box and playing inside the box. And
you could have saved yourself a whole lot of money just by going out to, a furniture place and getting an old, great big box and bringing it in your living room. Yep. And that was your Christmas present.
Well, and for the people who are listening, I think that's a good exercise. Think back to when you were a kid. Unless you're a kid right now, then think back to last Christmas, I guess, and ask yourself, what are the memories that I have of Christmas? Or, in fact, any holiday. What are the memories I've got? Now, we probably all can remember one or two gifts that we got that we really wanted and really liked and enjoyed for many, many years. But you probably got a few gifts every year for many years. How many of them can you actually remember? And I think your your example of the memories is an excellent one. I mean, one of my memories of Christmas, and I think it was probably Christmas morning, was my sister, who's 5 years younger than me. So at the time, she was probably, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years old. She came into my parents' bedroom on Christmas morning, and she said, "I can see reindeer tracks in the snow." Because it had actually snowed, I guess, the night before. And sure enough, we looked out the window and there were all these prints in the snow. And she was really excited that there were reindeer tracks. And so when she left the room, my dad, who was kind of half asleep, sort of rolled over and said, "Oh, I guess Sam, the dog next door, must have got out." And obviously had run across the field and made tracks. But there's a perfect example of what you're talking about, right? A memory that didn't cost anything. I'm sure my sister doesn't even remember it, but I remember, oh yeah, I remember that time at Christmas when that thing kind of happened. And those are the kind of memories you're talking about. What other kind of memories do you see people remembering that didn't cost a lot of money, but are the kind of things that people still remember?
In our family, socks.
Socks.
You always got a sock in your sock at Christmas. So,
One sock or two socks?
Well, two socks,
okay,
a pair.
okay.
It was a pair of socks. But,
Yeah.
it got to the point where, you're trying to be creative. The year I decided to learn to knit, yes, I knit a sock.
That's amazing.
Yes,
That's amazing.
it is.
And I assume it doesn't cost a lot of money to knit socks.
You can make it. You use old yarn,
And even buying socks, that doesn't cost a lot of money either.
Nope.
And that became a tradition then, that every year we get a new pair of socks.
We hunted around for the most unusual pair of socks.
And yet you probably never spent more than $5 on a pair, and that was it. So there you go. So there's a classic example of a memory that doesn't cost a huge amount of money. I mean, when we think of all the other types of things we do at the holiday season, going tobogganing, going skating, there's lots of free skating you can do during the winter at outdoor rinks and things like that. Hikes in the woods, whatever. Those are the kind of things we remember. Baking.
The family and friends. You're right. The baking, having family over. And, one person also doesn't have to be responsible for the whole meal. Do a potluck.
Yep.
And, yes, you usually end up with twice as much food if the potlucks are anything like our family.
Yeah.
And, family and friends, spending time together, arguing, fighting over the couch.
Yeah.
Watching the fireplace on TV.
Yep. Well, that's classic. The fireplace log channel on TV. And yeah, that's kind of a tradition at our house too. We've actually put the fire on and the fire log channel on as well. So
does it get warm in that house?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. The TV can actually, that's I think the only time we watch TV all year long, but it's a classic. So no, I think you're exactly right. And I think what we've got to do is think of those things that are memories, that are fun, that we will remember, but they're not going to cost us a whole boatload of money. Great. I really appreciate you being here today, Heather. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Make memories out of Christmas. That's great advice. I'll be back to wrap up the show after this quick break. You're listening to Debt Free in 30.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back. It's time for the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. On today's show, we had 3 guest experts give tips for the holiday season. Dr. Leanne Davies' tip is to reduce the maximum credit limit on your credit card. Call your credit card company and ask them to reduce your limit to what you need and nothing more, so you aren't tempted to overspend. Gail Vaz Oxlade's tip is to quit complaining or fire your bank. Instead of complaining about high bank charges, find a new bank, or at the very least, ask your current bank for a better deal. Heather Cudmore's advice is to make memories during the holiday season. It's not about the gifts you buy, it's about the memories you make. That's the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. So, what's my take on this? As a bankruptcy trustee, I can tell you that every year it's the same. Our Hoyes Michaelis helpline at 310-PLAN is quiet during December, but the phones start to ring on January 2nd, and they keep ringing through the winter and into the spring. Why? In a lot of cases, it's because of holiday season debt. When the credit card bills start arriving in January, and you see what you owe, that's when you realize you've got a problem. So here are my holiday season tips. First, if you want to avoid the credit card hangover in January, don't use credit cards at Christmas. Pay with cash or use your debit card. That way you can only spend the money you have, and you don't have any worries about getting into debt. Now, I get it. You don't want to be carrying a wad of cash to the shopping mall, and you get points if you use your credit card. So I understand why most people do their holiday shopping with a credit card. That's fine, but if you're using a credit card, have a budget. Decide before you go to the store how much you can afford to spend and stick to it. That way you spend within your means and stay out of debt trouble. As Heather Cudmore said, make memories. It's not about the gifts you buy, it's about the memories you make. That's our special holiday season tip show. I'm interested in hearing your tips, so feel free to post your comments or tips on our website at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. That's where you can find a link to subscribe to this show on iTunes, and you can also access our show notes, a transcript of this show, and links to everything we discussed, including links to the books written by Leanne Davies and Gail Vaz-Oxlade. Their books make great holiday gifts. That's our show for today. Thanks for listening. Until next week, happy holidays. I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.
Thanks for listening. This was Debt Free in 30.